Sometimes the moment happens quietly. You are standing in a room or sitting across from someone, and something in the atmosphere shifts just slightly. No one raises their voice. No one openly blames anyone. The conversation continues. The room still looks calm, and yet a small tension appears that wasn't there a moment before. And almost immediately, your attention turns inward. You start searching the last few seconds of the conversation. What you said, how you said it, whether your tone might have sounded different than you intended. It happens quickly, almost automatically, like a reflex your mind learned long ago. Did I say something wrong? The question doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, the way a familiar thought does when it has been repeated many times before. You begin replaying the moment in your mind while the conversation continues moving forward around you. You remember the exact sentence you spoke. You hear it again in your memory, but this time you listen more carefully. You imagine how it might have sounded to the other person. Maybe the words carried a tone you didn't notice at the time. Maybe your response came too quickly. Maybe there was something in your expression that you didn't realize. Nothing clearly wrong appears. But the possibility that something might have been wrong is enough to keep the question alive. So you review the moment again. The silence that followed someone's response. The way their voice sounded slightly different afterward. A look that may have meant nothing, but now feels like it could have meant something. The room still looks the same as before. People continue speaking normally. No one has pointed at you or suggested that anything was your fault. And yet, inside your mind, the responsibility has already begun to move. It happens gently, almost politely. You begin adjusting the moment in small ways, wondering if there was a better sentence you could have used or a softer way you could have responded. In many ways, it even feels like the reasonable thing to do. If something in the atmosphere changed, it makes sense to examine your own part in it first. It feels thoughtful to check whether you might have misunderstood something or said more than you intended. But over time, these quiet internal corrections begin happening faster and faster. The moment something feels uncomfortable in a room, the search begins automatically. You review your words, your tone, your reactions, looking for the small place where the shift might have started. And more often than not, the answer that settles into place is the same one that has appeared many times before. If something felt wrong in the room, it was probably because of you. The feeling doesn't usually begin with something obvious. No one announces it. No one clearly says that something is your fault. The moment is often small enough that it could pass without much attention at all. A sentence lands differently than expected. Someone reacts with a tone that carries a trace of frustration. A conversation ends with a silence that feels heavier than the words that came before it. And slowly, almost automatically, your mind begins searching for your part in it. At first, the search seems reasonable. It feels responsible to review what just happened. You look back over the conversation, noticing the details you might have missed in the moment. The way you phrased something, the timing of your response, the possibility that your tone sounded sharper than you intended. You are not trying to blame yourself. You are simply trying to understand. But the search has a quiet direction to it. Instead of examining the entire moment, your attention returns again and again to the same place. Your words, your reactions, your interpretation of what happened. Maybe I misunderstood them. Maybe I reacted too quickly. Maybe I made it awkward without realizing it. Each possibility feels small on its own. None of them seem dramatic enough to challenge out loud. They remain quiet thoughts that pass through your mind while the rest of the day continues as normal. But the pattern begins repeating. Another conversation. Another small shift in the atmosphere. Another moment that leaves behind a faint sense that something went slightly wrong. And again, your mind begins tracing the moment backward. You start noticing how quickly the question appears now. Sometimes it arrives even before the conversation has finished. While the other person is still speaking, a part of your attention has already moved inward, checking whether your last sentence might have changed the tone of the room. You become careful in subtle ways. Your responses soften. Your explanations grow longer. You add small clarifications that were never necessary before, just to make sure your meaning cannot be misunderstood. From the outside, this may look like patience or consideration. The conversation still moves smoothly. Nothing about the moment seems unusual, but inside, something has shifted. Instead of simply experiencing the conversation, you are also monitoring it, watching for signs that something might have gone wrong and quietly preparing to take responsibility if it did. Over time, this quiet habit becomes so familiar that it no longer feels like a choice. When something feels uncomfortable in a room, your mind begins searching for the place where you might have caused it. And the search almost always begins in the same direction. After a while, the question stops appearing only in specific moments. It begins showing up everywhere, quietly shaping the way you understand what happens around you. A conversation ends, and you feel the familiar pull to review it. At first, you are only trying to understand why something felt uncomfortable. The moment itself might have been simple. A sentence, a look, a short pause that lingered slightly longer than expected. None of it clearly points to blame. And yet, the search begins. You replay the conversation slowly in your mind, not because anyone asked you to, but because leaving the moment unexplained feels unsettled. Your attention moves carefully across the details. What you said, when you said it, whether your words may have carried a tone you didn't intend. The longer you sit with the memory, the more the moment seems to rearrange itself. At first, your reaction felt natural. You remember responding honestly, the way you usually would. But when you examine the scene again, the certainty you felt earlier begins to loosen. Small possibilities appear that weren't there before. Maybe I spoke too quickly. Maybe I should have listened longer before answering. Maybe the way I said it sounded different than I meant it to. None of these thoughts arrive with force. They are quiet suggestions, almost reasonable on the surface. Each one offers a simple explanation for why something in the moment might have shifted. And slowly, without anyone directly saying it, the explanation settles in the same place again. You begin to imagine the moment from the other person's side of the room. You picture how your words may have sounded to them, how your expression might have looked, how your reaction may have changed the tone of the conversation without you realizing it. The scene becomes clearer in one sense and more uncertain in another. The more carefully you study it, the more responsibility seems to drift toward you. This process begins happening earlier and earlier. Sometimes it starts before the conversation has even ended. While someone is still speaking, a quiet part of your attention has already turned inward, checking the last sentence you said and measuring how it might have landed. Your responses become more careful as a result. You soften your tone, choose your words more slowly, add explanations that were never necessary before. You begin smoothing the edges of your sentences as you speak them, trying to prevent the possibility of misunderstanding before it appears. From the outside, this might look like patience or thoughtfulness. The conversation continues normally. Nothing about the moment suggests that anything is wrong. But inside, the effort grows heavier. Instead of simply participating in the moment, you are also managing it, watching for signs that something has shifted and preparing to correct your part in it if it has. Over time, the habit becomes so familiar that it begins to feel natural. When something in the atmosphere changes, even slightly, your mind moves in the same direction it has learned to move before. You search for the place where you might have caused it. After some time, the habit becomes so familiar that you almost stop noticing when it begins. A moment passes, a conversation ends, a small tension appears in the room, and the quiet review starts again. Your mind moves through the scene carefully, tracing the edges of what happened and searching for the place where things might have shifted. Often, there is no clear answer waiting there. The conversation itself may have been ordinary. Nothing dramatic was said. No one openly pointed to blame. Yet the feeling that something might have been wrong lingers in the air long enough for your mind to begin its quiet work. You look at your own part in the moment first. That has become the natural starting point. The words you used, the tone you carried, the timing of your response. Each detail receives a little more attention than it did while the moment was happening. At first, this kind of reflection can feel responsible. It can even feel thoughtful, like a careful way of making sure that you understand what happened around you. But over time, something subtle begins to change. Instead of simply reviewing the moment, you begin adjusting it. Your memory of the conversation slowly rearranges itself around the possibility that the tension must have started with you. The explanation becomes easier to accept than the uncertainty that came before it. It is a quiet kind of resolution. If the shift in the room happened because of something you said or did, then at least the moment has an answer. The uncertainty dissolves quickly once responsibility settles into place. And so the mind learns that this explanation brings a certain kind of relief. Not comfort exactly, but clarity. The search ends. Yet the cost of that clarity often remains unnoticed for a long time. Each time the responsibility settles automatically on you, a small part of your own perception becomes easier to question. The next moment that feels uncertain will be approached with the same quiet assumption already waiting in the background. Perhaps it began with me. The pattern continues not because someone repeats the accusation, but because the mind has learned where to place the answer when the atmosphere in a room becomes difficult to read. And sometimes the most honest thing that can happen is simply to notice that pattern without trying to solve it immediately. To see how quickly the mind moves toward blame and how familiar that direction has become. Just noticing it can be enough to let the moment remain where it is, without rushing to place its weight on your shoulders again.